This video is going to be all about variegated shrubs and trees. We will definitely not be covering the vast selection that is variegated plants out in the world. It seems like almost everything has a variegated version of it out in the world. People are always out, looking for these things. A lot of these variegations you'll see on plants were just sports. It's just one rogue branch, on an osmanthus. This is an osmanthus called Misty River. That's a variegated one, but this was probably just one rogue branch on the side of a green on a green osmanthus, and then it was collected, and then there's all kinds of different versions of these variegations that you can get in plants as well that we'll see in this video as well. But so this is going to be all variegated shrubs and trees. This particular osmanthus will get big in time. We've got it tucked up in a corner here where we want to get something with some height on it. The new foliage on it is kind of a pink color, and then it settles into a variegation. Every leaf looks kind of individually painted. This being an osmanthus, it'll bloom in the cool part of the year, so sometime around October, November, December, and then a few more flowers in like February and March. You'll get these tiny white flowers that are incredibly fragrant. This plant just doesn't need to flower. It does, but it doesn't need to because look how bright and showy it is, and it contrasts beautifully with this blue-green foliage on this mahonia that's next to it, and pretty much anything in the garden. So some of these variegated plants will be just a hint of variegation or a little few dots, on a leaf, but some of them will be very vivid. The more vivid the variegation is, typically the more shade it's going to require overall. This one is getting full sun, but the front of the house here puts it in the shade by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Otherwise, once you get to this kind of white variegation like this here in the south, this plant's going to burn a little bit in the afternoon sun. Regular osmanthus fragrans will take full sun morning to night, not without a problem. But I think this one, you got to cut a little bit down off of it, or you're going to get a little bit of burn in it. So the more white that's in the leaf, typically that's going to tell you that it probably needs a little bit more afternoon shade. This is a podocarpus called Roman candle. I think it'll be wildly popular in the next few years. Unfortunately, it's taking growers a little while to get numbers on this one because it's much slower growing. The one thing you're going to sacrifice in variegated plants is the rate of growth, for sure. They're typically going to grow a little bit slower, with some exceptions to that. There are, sometimes you'll get hybrid vigor in something that happens to have it grow quicker, but this is definitely the exception to that. This particular plant has been sitting here for 3 years or more at this point, and it's grown, it's grown about 14 inches tall, 14 inches. We've got one beside the screen porch in the back that has grown a little bit more vigorously than this. This one, it will take, podocarpus typically we're going to think of as part shade, evergreen conifers. Typically you'll see them down in places like Charleston, but they will take full sun. I see them out in parking lots down there, but more typical in the southeast, you're going to see them in kind of part shade conditions. Typically the growth habit is very upright and narrow on most podocarpus. Mackey is probably the most common of the upright green growing ones. Pretty fast, grows so narrow that it makes, if you're on this very small lot, it's a great screening plant for that. This would also accomplish the same thing, just a much slower process. But you see, it's almost a white variegation. You have that green in the middle. Once the leaves are really much older, they'll turn green in time, and it creates this contrast where Roman candle is the perfect name because it looks like a candle. The bright coloration on top of that green foliage that's down on the inside. So I don't think I'm buying this one as a screening plant, but I'm definitely buying it because it's an awesome specimen plant. Would work well in a container, but this is a conifer that will take our southern heat. This is a really nice new crop of Goshiki osmanthus. Goshiki, mentioned this one many times on the channel. There's an individual plant video if you want to go back and learn more about Goshiki osmanthus, but Goshiki means 5 colors in Japanese, and so when this thing leaves out in the spring, it has kind of a pinkish red new foliage on it, and then it settles into these interesting variegations, and brighter in the newer growth and kind of darker green in the older growth on the plant. It looks wicked, like it would just eat you alive, but it's not really at all. It does flower and it gets fragrant flowers like other osmanthus, but I've said many times it takes years for this thing to bloom for some reason. It's a little bit shy to flower. That's what I would say initially, but once it's established in the ground for a while. One at J.C. Ralston Arboretum, around 8 feet tall. I think if you see this on a tag, you're going to see 3 to 6 feet, somewhere in that range, typically for the height, but it will get bigger than that like any other leafy evergreen plant. You could shear these pretty hard in the late winter, early spring into either pyramidal shapes or upright narrow shapes, or however you want to keep them. And then that new foliage will come out on it, and it's super, super striking against that variegation. Look at this color guard yucca in a big mass. Amazing thing about this plant, this is February. I'm in a plant nursery that is literally covering all of their plants in the nursery because there's 14 degrees coming in the next few nights. They don't even put these yucca pot tight. This thing is so cold hardy. It's cold hardy up to zone 4 or 5. This is color guard yucca, and it's yucca filamentosa, and you can see the little filaments along the stem, and that gold center blade. The center of this blade has this gold color. It'll get some slight pink hues in it in the winter time, change up a bit, and then in the spring and summer be all just this gold center and green outer striping on the foliage. Of course, it's prickly. If you want to get yourself in here and figure out how to get hurt by it, you can, but it's not a plant you're ever going to have to do any maintenance to. It will grow about 2 feet in height or so, and then you'll get offsets on it, so it'll get wider in time. You can cut those offsets off and start new plants, or you can just let it continue to get wider. It will get a flower spike on it during the late spring, summer, white, kind of dangling off-white flowers on it that the pollinators absolutely go crazy for. Looks like a plant that couldn't possibly be cold hardy, you know, down to, you know, in the negative degrees, but it absolutely is. And just beautiful in mass like this. This is a golden Oakland holly from the Southern Living Plant Collection. This is a great upright, narrow holly. The one we have in our garden in Raleigh is now 12 feet tall or so. I had to get on a ladder the other day to prune the top of it. So I know it's right around 12 feet tall, and it's almost as narrow as this one is at 5 or 6 feet. I mean, it's only gotten to this wide. And so where a lot of these other hollies are naturally upright, and a lot of these plants are naturally upright, they do tend to add width as they get taller. This one is really, really good about staying super narrow. I really like the gold coloration, the variegation in this plant. A lot of the gold hollies or variegated hollies, to me, are not great looking plants. Sometimes they just look like sick hollies, if I'm being honest. But this one just looks really fantastic, and it's a bright pop of color. We've got it in our part shade conditions in our Raleigh garden, but it would prefer to be out here in the full sun like these are, and these are much brighter. It's like one side of ours is really bright because it's getting more sun than the other. They're self-fruiting. You know, spring flowering, self-fruiting. I haven't seen many berries on it yet, but it really just doesn't need them at all to be a show-off in the garden. So this is going to be a great corner foundation plant, or a part of a screen where you need narrower plants to make up your screen. Standing in a group of kaleidoscope abelia in the wintertime, and in the winter you can really tell why this plant is called kaleidoscope. During the growing season, it has it's a variegated leaf with a kind of a yellow and a dark green variegation. And then it blooms in the summertime. Pollinators go crazy for these abelia. This is a dwarf abelia that stays low and mounding. But then in the wintertime, kaleidoscope is the name. And this is what it does in the wintertime. You'll get these oranges, splashes of oranges and almost reds and all kinds of interesting colors. It'll depend on where you are in the country as to how much color you're going to get during the winter. These are hardy in zone 6 to 9. Zone 6, they'll thin out a little bit. They're not quite as evergreen, but they'll fully color up, almost purple, okay? And then as you get toward the more southern areas, it'll hold more of that just basic variegation that it has. I don't want to say basic, it's a beautiful plant in the summertime. I may lean toward liking radiance just a little bit more than this. It tends to stay a little more compact, tends to hold its variegation a little better year round, and it has a little less of the spiky growth that all of these dwarf abelia get. And truly, all of these dwarf abelia, in time, they're perfect little low mounds. They're 2 to 3 feet in height and 3 to 4 feet in width ultimately, but they'll start to get this spiky growth that comes out on them, and you have to prune down into the plant occasionally. No big deal overall, but Kaleidoscope does get a little more of that spiky growth than I see in other places. But in the wintertime, it does this, and it just, I mean, this is, I don't know, 80 plants, and every single one of them has something interesting about it, and oranges and dark purples and yellows and other colors showing up in them. This is a variegated pittosporum. There are some named varieties of this, and then there are some dwarf versions of this. So we have Mojo pittosporum at the house, which is a dwarf version of this variegated Pittosporum tobira. This one right here, though, the regular variegated pittosporum, I've seen this plant as tall as 15, 18 feet in height and 12, 15 feet in width. So where a lot of times in a container it looks like it's not going to get all that big, it will. I had a neighbor use these. They're great part shade screening plants is really the preferred use for these. If you're looking for, you know, pittosporum are great ornamental plants, not the most cold hardy things in the world, but they're great ornamental plants. And you know, this is a variegated version. You'll get some reversion. You'll get, in the variegated one, you'll get occasionally some slightly different variegation, or even worse though, is that you'll occasionally get some green reversion in it. You want to cut that out if you see any of that green reversion. They do get a very sweet flower on them that's kind of, you're not going to see it. It's a flower that's typically down in the plant just a little bit. It's kind of orange scented flower. Pretty fast growing once it gets going, a little slow to start. But this is one of those plants that I can put a pittosporum in a, you know, in a very low, almost ground cover video. I can put it in a low shrub video. I can put it in a screening plant video. But those are very different. They're different varieties. And so the regular variegated pittosporum, this thing will get quite large, and it's a great option for a screening plant in a part shade space. This is Radiance Abelia. This is a dwarf mounding abelia, and you can see in this container how compact and how nice that plant actually is. Filming this in February, so you can just imagine how nice it is actually during the growing season. Evergreen, obviously, but zone 6 to 9, zone 6, typically these will thin out a little more in the winter time, and then they'll grow all the way down to zone 9. They'll grow in really, really poor conditions. I mean, up against really hot foundations, really kind of drought-stricken places, really tough spaces. I even see Abelia doing well under shade trees, a little bit thinner, but you know, in part shade and shade conditions where, you know, other things just don't want to be around root competition in city spaces and that kind of thing. Blooms all summer long. Doesn't really start blooming until around June, and then it blooms all summer. Pollinators absolutely love them. They're white flowers though against this variegated foliage, and they don't show up all that much. So not calling it a showy flowering plant, but a great flowering shrub for pollinators, and one of the longer blooming shrubs we can have in our gardens. Most flowering shrubs we think of tend to be things that are quick hitters. They come and go pretty quickly, where these, once they get started, they just continue to bloom all summer. Even if it didn't bloom, it wouldn't need to. Look at this. This is the growth habit on this thing. Our Radiance Abelia in our garden are about 2 feet tall and 3 feet wide after 4 years. A lot of times when we're shopping for acubas, you'll see just solid green ones, and then you'll see gold dust available. Not a lot of other selections, but there are a ton of named ones out in the world that are super, super interesting, and we have covered several on the channel over the years. This one's called Golden King. Great name for it. Quite a bit more yellow in this one than there is in gold dust. What a great looking plant. Of course, these are for part shade or shade conditions. You can keep these pretty much any size you want to keep them. Ultimately, most of these will creep up. These gold foliage plants are slower growing, or chartreuse colored plants are slower growing, but ultimately it can creep up over 6 feet in height, but can be kept more like 3 to 4 feet in height if you want to do that. But what a great plant. Those shady spaces that have those long shadows in the fall and in the spring, these are the type of plants that really, really stand out. And if you can find plants that contrast with foliage type, you know, look at those two together. This is a podocarpus, a macrophyllus with a gold aucuba. This is one of our absolute favorite low doming evergreen shrubs. This is Mojo pittosporum. We have 4 of these in our garden in Raleigh, and we have one of everything. So if we have more than one of something, you know, we definitely like it. Love this plant for part shade or shade conditions. This variegation is changeable during the season. So the oldest growth is because it's off-white variegation, but when it's actively growing, the variegation is more of a gold on green. It does flower. It gets a fragrant flower down inside the shrub that you'll smell. Probably takes a few years on these dwarf ones to get to the point where they're going to flower. Again, flower's insignificant, but you'll smell it. But we really love this just for its evergreen, low doming habit. We have 3 of them together in one spot that are covering about 9-10 square feet. We don't have to weed, don't have to think about. It's not much taller than it is in this container right here. It's probably less than 2 feet in height and probably 3.5 feet in width, and 4 years in the ground without having to do any pruning on them. Here's a crop of gold dust aucuba, another great part shade or shade shrub. Gold dust tends to be more on the green side with some gold speckling, and you'll get some variation in this where you may see a center yellow stripe in it, or, you know, again, you'll see the occasional branch that's quite a bit brighter. They tend to be a little bit variable in time. You can let these get 6 or 8 feet in height in time, or you can keep them 3 to 4 feet in height. Totally up to you on how you handle these. They are moist, well-drained conditions is kind of ideal for aucuba, but they will take dry shade, which is a nice thing. And if you go to the Asian garden at Ralston Arboretum, you can see tons of different variegations and non-variegated aucuba in that space. And you know, I've always loved aucuba. Again, though, gold dust tends to be one of the more common ones you'll find at retail, but more and more we're seeing some that have brighter variegations, more chartreuse color in them, some that almost look completely yellow with just a spotting of green rather than, you know, green with the spotting of yellow. But really versatile plant for our shade and part shade areas. Sometimes you'll see this is deer resistant, and I made the mistake of saying that on a video in the past, but lots of people have deer just mow these down. So I would not put it in the deer resistant category. This is a group of Swift Creek privet, and there used to be really a lot of them grown in virtually every nursery here in our area of North Carolina. We see less of them in nurseries now, mainly because Sunshine Ligustrum has kind of replaced this with much showier, you know, vibrant chartreuse color that it has. This also flowers and produces seed, and that is also problematic because it is an invasive, you know, Chinese privet, and Sunshine Ligustrum doesn't flower. So that's the main reasons it's been kind of displaced. But again, millions of them, you know, of this plant and other variegated. So this is a named variety of variegated Chinese privet. So there's variegated Chinese privet around forever, but this one is more compact, better color in the variegation. When it first leaves out in the spring, it's kind of a yellowish variegation. We're filming this toward late May, and it's kind of settled into a creamy yellow or creamy white variegation at this point. You can cut this back and regenerate some fresher foliage on it anytime you want. If you do have this plant, and one of the main reasons I'm talking about it right now in this video is because after it flowers, which this one has flowers on it right here, after it flowers, before it sets those seeds, if you do that pruning on it, you can prevent that seed formation, which is the invasive part of this plant. And in pruning it, it's going to flush it back out again and put some good color on it. So if you have this plant, you don't want to get rid of it, you know it's problematic, prune it after it flowers, and you can save everybody from getting a ton of seed that we would get from it. And again, the plant will actually look better in your garden. This one can be held 3 to 4 feet in height, up to 8 feet in height, whatever you want to do with it, but definitely is more compact than regular variegated Chinese privet. This is Buxus sempervirens variegata. Buxus sempervirens is common boxwood or European boxwood. It has a small leaf on it, rather slow growing. There are boxwoods that definitely grow a little bit faster than these. I really like this boxwood. We have 2 of them in our garden at home, and if we have more than one of anything, it must be pretty good. But I've got one that I've just created a round ball, just like this one, but slightly smaller than this, and another one that's kind of a 2-ball topiary that I'm eventually going to make into a 3-ball topiary. So you can do anything you want to with this plant. It can be a container plant, it can be topiaried, it can be turned into a round ball, it can be turned into a small little Christmas tree. So just like you would do with other you know, common boxwoods like that, you can shape them however you want. Just extremely, extremely low maintenance, I would say, and I'm just throwing this out as a caution just to you know, worrying about disease or anything moving from plant to plant, I would probably prune these yourself. So keep your own pruners, keep them clean. You know, we don't want somebody else bringing something into the garden. You know, boxwood, these are blight susceptible. That's what I would say. But I love this plant. It's so striking. Every time I see it in a garden, it's hard to get something that's this showy and also this formal at the same time. It kind of combines those two things together. And you can see it. Anything that goes around, anything that's near, you know, looks better because of it. This is a very common landscape plant that I have grown and sold for years and all over America, really. They're hardy in zone 4 to 8. This is either rose glow barberry or rosy glow barberry. You'll occasionally see it as rosy glow. I think the actual name though is rose glow. Has this mottled new color in the foliage as it's coming out during the season. So it'll have, goes through all kinds of color changes throughout the season, but in the spring especially, it has this kind of mottled, variegated type of look to it. The older foliage down in the middle will start to turn green in time. You know, this plant, you know, if I talk about barberries, I'm definitely, for some places in the country, these are invasive plants. Here in Raleigh, North Carolina, we don't have an issue with it, but if you go up to Connecticut and places in the Northeast, you see it in the, you know, barberries growing in the ditches up there. So some person's invasive is another person's ornamental plant, is basically what I'll say. The shape of this one tends to be kind of upright and narrow overall if you never prune on it. Most people are going to prune on the top of these and kind of meatball them a bit, and it's going to make them wider in time. But if you just let this do its own thing, it becomes like a fountain, basically, like this, and it will grow, you know, 3 to 4 feet and then just kind of splay out like that. It almost weights itself down. But we see lots of people like in our neighborhood with a whole row of these that will prune the top of them and eventually just kind of make them wider and more rigidly upright looking shrubs. But if we're going to plant one of these, you know, I would suggest just putting it in a place where you can allow it to get some size. It is thorny, so you know, I feel like I need to mention that. They tend to be on people's deer resistant list because of the thorns, but I have seen at my nursery a deer come and go down in the plant a bit. The thorns point this direction on the stems and just strip the leaves that way. Just if they ever figure it out, they can actually take the leaves off of these without getting thorns. I have stuck thousands of cuttings of these, and if you spend a day messing with them with wet hands, it will definitely get you. But plant it in a place where you don't have to prune on it, because I think that's the best shape of this plant, and then you don't have to worry about the thorns if you're not having to prune on it. This is a pretty cool variegated gardenia. It was given to us on one of our trips out into the world last year. It's done incredibly well. We had it in the garden during the winter. Sometimes these variegated plants can lose a little bit of cold tolerance, just throwing that out there. They don't, when a plant is dark green like this, it can produce, can take in more energy, store more energy. Some of these, gold foliage plants, variegated plants like this are definitely, sometimes can be a half a zone or more, less cold hardy overall, but this thing had no problem with it whatsoever. This one goes by a Japanese name, Ogon no Hana is the Japanese name for it, I think, and then it's sold out in the world as gold doubloon. I think doubloon is a Spanish coin, a gold coin, so it has that gold color in it. I could almost put this one in the gold foliage shrub video, but it is actually, in fact, variegated. You can see that dark streaking that's in the leaf. The leaves will come out kind of chartreuse with this green spotting and then fade into more of a yellow down in the center of the plant. Does get the white flowers on it. There's a lot of different variegated gardenias out there. So variegated ground cover ones, upright ones. Again, typically a little less cold hardy overall, and then it'll get get the white, super fragrant flowers that you would expect a gardenia to have. But I've never had, although this year being the exception, our variegated Radicans gardenia bloomed like crazy, but typically my variegated gardenias bloom a little bit less overall. But look how showy that thing is. That's 12 months out of the year. This is gonna look like this. You can tell by the leaf size on a gardenia about how big it's gonna get. This one with that bigger leaf like this, and this is on a small plant, is probably going to get quite large in time. Again, slightly slower growing though than any green version of it. We have a ton of variegated plants in this garden. It's something that I have a hard time passing up when we're out shopping. And this will be the shrub and tree version of this video. There's a ground cover and perennial and annual version of this video as well coming, and they're just hard to pass up. I mean, they're so showy here in the garden. This is one, I think, of the more underused plants out in the world, and I wish it was more widely available. This is a pittosporum called a species called heterophyllum. So typically we see the pittosporum species we see being sold as plant, ornamental in the ornamental landscapes as Tobera is the species name for them, and they have larger leaves. Weirdly, a little less cold tolerant than this particular species. I have found this one has a slightly smaller leaf, and this is the variegated version of it. So this is variegata. Gets a very small, almost insignificant white flower on it in the late spring. So it's long. It's filming this in July, so it's long finished flowering. But have never touched this plant. It's been in this spot now for 2 years, probably something like that at this point, and just never had a blade on it. So the one at the Ralston Arboretum is about this tall and probably this wide. The one at Juniper Level Botanic Garden has gotten to about 5 feet tall, and it's 12 feet wide. But it's been there for a long, long time. And so this thing could be kept this size, I think, pretty much permanently. So in the late winter, early spring, I could just cut this back and tidy it up, and it would just come back out about 6 or 8 inches during that growing season. But I think this is a plant, a lot of the plants you're gonna see in this video are going to be widely commercially available. This one, unfortunately, for some reason is not. And I try to tell growers that this plant, tell growers about this plant frequently, and I'd like to see it offered more. But look how perfect an ornamental plant that actually is. This is golden euonymus, a wildly popular plant to purchase at box stores and garden centers and all over the place, because in the spring especially, they look really incredible. I am going to go out on a limb here and say this is more of a nursery plant and a container plant than it is a great garden plant, because of the millions of these things that get sold. I just don't see very many of them out in gardens, around our area. It's like something, great container plant, again, a great container plant in the nursery, really, really super showy, and then something happens to them. They do get euonymus scale, they get powdery mildew. Silver King euonymus tends to get a little more powdery mildew on it than this. But let's briefly describe the plant here, because they are really strikingly beautiful. In the spring especially, the reason they're called golden euonymus is because that new variegation is a really vibrant gold yellow color. It will settle into a slightly different version of yellow later in the season. It does flower. You can see some flower buds on this one. They're insignificant little white flowers. People aren't really growing them for that reason. They do tend, like other Japanese euonymus, to have an upright, narrow habit. So if you have a corner foundation planting, if you have low hedging or a narrow space you're trying to hedge, this would be a plant that could potentially work for that. Typically going to get, I would probably keep them around 6 feet, but they can ultimately get taller than that with kind of a narrow 3 to 4 foot habit, something like that. Again, this plant, there's not a retail place I could go to right now that's not selling this plant and people are buying it. And then I go around to gardens all over the place and just don't see very many of them. I had a professor tell me a long time ago that there are 2 types of Japanese euonymus, ones that have scale and ones that are about to get scale. It was a joke, but these things are very susceptible to euonymus scale. So you want them in good air movement, okay? You want to prune around them, make sure this is not a plant you want things just sitting right up against like that, because they're going to be more vulnerable to powdery mildew and euonymus scale. If you get reversion in it, which literally there's an example of it right in front of me right here. If you get a green shoot come on it, you need to cut that out really quickly, because that will grow much faster than the variegated part of that plant. But that's golden euonymus. This is Euonymus japonicus Silver King, otherwise known as Silver King euonymus. Been around for a long, long time. There are several of these variegated, or this one has a creamy white variegation, but there's also gold variegated euonymus and Japanese euonymus and others. This one tends to have an upright, narrow growth habit, and you can see it in this 7-gallon container here that wants to go upright and narrow. You can definitely top these out and have them get a little bit wider in time. Typically, you're going to see these 6 feet in height, maybe 3 to 4 feet in width, something like that. It does flower, and you can maybe see over there that they're budded up. Flower's really inconspicuous, not really grown for that at all. They're grown for this foliage color that they keep year round. They're hardy up to zone 6. And really, I see probably more of these. I'm just going to throw this out there. I see more of these sold probably than I actually see in gardens. I do think that they are susceptible to euonymus scale, which if they're under a lot of stress, that can happen. I think you can have one of these, be very nice. They're tolerant of pretty tough conditions, but I think if you subject them to those really tough conditions, it makes them vulnerable to euonymus scale. It also tends to make them also vulnerable, it seems like, more to suckering, to reversion, where you get these green stems come up in them. And if you see any solid green stems start on these, you need to get it cut out as quick as possible. Again, there's just millions of these grown and sold every year. I think they look so good in a container that they're kind of irresistible to folks to buy. But again, I just don't see many of them out in gardens that I go, wow, I got to have that plant. They tend to just be under whatever kind of weird stresses in the garden. Where you'd use this, corner foundation, in between windows, a low hedging plant that something that if you only want it to get 6, potentially 8 feet in time, if you were just to let it like that. But that's going to be the main uses for this plant. I occasionally see them planted under low windows and that kind of thing, just because it was an attractive plant to a landscaper. If you have them under windows, you're going to be fighting them forever, pruning on them all the time. They probably need to be moved to another location. This is Gardenia jasminoides variegata, or variegated gardenia. This is an upright grower. There's actually trailing gardenias that grow kind of flat to the ground, and there's a variegated version of that if you want a variegated one that grows lower, but this one is the upright version. These are stretching for light a little bit because I think they're being grown in a little bit too much shade, so they're typically a little fuller than what you're seeing here. And they have an incredibly striking variegation. So we talk about variegated plants, sometimes it's just a little slash of yellow or a little spot of white. This truly has a vivid variegation on it. You can see it from a mile away. These get the double white flowers that you would expect on a gardenia that are very fragrant. I've never found that you get as many. It doesn't flower as well as something like August Beauty gardenia, which would basically be the green leafed equivalent to this. Probably 6 to 8 feet in height over some period of time. This one definitely needs part shade. You can grow August Beauty gardenias. Most of them part shade is kind of best overall, but you can grow that one out in a little more sun, and I've seen it in the middle of golf courses. They're just irrigating them to do that. But this plant is going to need part shade, or it's going to burn in the summer months, which is then you're playing this game where it's stretching a bit because it's in a little bit too much shade. But I think it's worth growing regardless, even if you're getting less flowers, even if it's not quite as thick growing as some other gardenias, because the variegation is just so showy. And in a place we're in a pine forest here, basically, where these are being grown, and in these kind of long shadows on a cloudy day like this, you can just see them from a mile away. This is Aucuba japonica marmorata. It's absolutely one of the showiest of the Japanese Aukubas, or spotted laurels, sometimes people will call them. Typically, gold dust Aucuba, the main spotted laurel that you'll see, has little yellow spots, or all white or slightly yellow spots on it. This one's like an improvement of that, where the spots have almost run together. There's so much more color in this plant overall. Moderate grower to about 6 feet tall, probably take 10 years to get there, something like that. This is a female clone. You need a male plant in order to get the berries on these female selections of Aucuba japonica, but you can see how showy this one is and why I'm overall drawn to it. So it basically, we'll call this gold dust that's got more dust than gold dust has, and really shows up well. These are for part shade or shade conditions typically, and evenly moist soils typically, but they'll adapt to almost any shade conditions that you have. And this is going to be a good low screening plant, or the front of your border for other type of screening plant, because it is evergreen. This is Aucuba japonica pictorata. This one's been around for a long time. It's one I grew at my nursery. It has this brighter center yellow in what we would call a spotted laurel. A lot of times these are referred to as spotted laurels, because here's what like gold dust Aucuba looks like. And there's a few other varieties out, named varieties out in the world that have these spotting like this. But this one adds this bright yellow center. I will say that this is one of the most variable plants I have ever grown or produced. 50% of them will be the showiest thing you've ever grown, and 50% of them will be, have less of that yellow in there. So I don't know, again, there's some variability here. So if you have, if you're looking at this plant, you might want to go ahead and select for one that, while you can, it has a little more color in it. That doesn't mean it's going to completely stay that way. The next branch that comes up may be more just what gold dust Aucuba or spotted Aucuba. These are part shade or shade plants. They would prefer kind of evenly moist soil, but they will adapt to dry shade pretty well also. Most of the named selections out in the world are female selections, and you need to have a male Aucuba if you can acquire one to get the berries, the beautiful red berries that they form as well. This one, pretty vigorous grower overall in comparison to some of the others. I mean, I've seen this one in the ground, a little over 6 feet tall and 5 to 6 feet in width, something like that. You could definitely keep it smaller than that if you wanted to. You could do some late winter, early spring pruning on it if you want to do that. But really great compact habit, beautiful, beautiful, striking plant. I love these really bright chartreuse colors in shaded areas, because they really brighten, long afternoon shaded areas, especially in the spring and in the fall, they really just show up from a mile away. This is going to be on the small side of ornamental trees, but this is Acer palmatum butterfly, one of the absolute most beautiful of all Japanese maples, in my opinion, upright Japanese maples, in my opinion. Just absolutely incredible variegation in this plant. They'll start off with kind of a pink hue to them, and then settle into this beautiful variegation. Has the kind of reddish pink stems on it. This one can be kept as a container plant and kept pretty small for years, or go out in the landscape, and become a small ornamental tree over time. Really am always been drawn to this plant. Definitely in the south, with the Japanese maples, the further south you go, the more shade they're going to need, and this variegated one is definitely going to need an overstory, something over top of it, shading it. It needs good bright light in order to do this, so don't put it in the shadiest place in your garden. It's more about having high shade above it that will keep it from burning, but still now allow enough light in to keep this color on it. This is Gardenia jasminoides radicans variegata, or otherwise known as variegated trailing gardenia. So it's a trailing gardenia, meaning it spreads across the ground rather than growing tall. Ultimately, you can maintain this 1 to 2 feet in height, maybe 3 to 4 feet in width. It will creep up in time if it's happy and healthy, and get a little bigger than that if you want it to. This is the variegated version of radicans gardenia. There's a green version of this. The green version, the white flowers are a little more showy on it because it's against a green backdrop. This variegated one has small white double very, very fragrant flowers. It's a gardenia, so it's going to have those very fragrant flowers, but they're not as showy against this variegated foliage. But you'll know when it's flowering. They'll flower on new growth in the spring, so it'll flush out in April, typically around May for us in Raleigh, North Carolina. These are hardy in zones 8 to 10, or maybe 7B to 10 in a protected space. In zones 9 and 10, probably blooming a little bit before that. And then you'll get some residual flowers during the summertime. If it needs any pruning on it, it's probably best done right after that spring flowering. You can tidy it up just a bit if you have a crazy limb on it. One other thing you may need to cut out of it is the occasional green sport. So this will revert back to green, and those need to be cut out and cut all the way down into the plant if you can, because those green branches will eventually take it over and it'll just be a green trailing gardenia instead of a variegated trailing gardenia. They like kind of rich, moist but well-drained soils typically do better in sandy soils overall than clay soils. I have a clay-based soil here in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we have it mounded up just a bit out here. They become reasonably drought tolerant once they're in the ground for a little while, but we're trying to get new variegated growth on it. We're trying to get flowers on it. So if it becomes abnormally dry, this is a plant I would check back in and water on. We fertilize this garden once a year with an organic fertilizer in the late winter, and that's all it really needs. It's rabbit and deer resistant, but gardenias, especially if they're not in any kind of open situation, can get white flies and a few other insect related problems. Those of you in colder areas of the country can bring this in the wintertime and keep it in a very bright window. Get it outside when you can during the wintertime when it's warm enough to have it outside, because they tend to get a few more insect related problems when they're in indoor environments. But I wouldn't shy away in colder places from having gardenias and just, bringing them in and out as container plants. This thing is great mass planted, perfect little tidy little ground cover. We have it as just a one of a kind here. This really beautiful variegated foliage is evergreen. I haven't even said it's evergreen. So a lot of qualities for this plant. Gardenias can be a little tricky in the garden. So if you lose one or two in the process of finding the perfect place for a gardenia in your yard, that's okay. Try it again, because gardenias are great. They're really great ornamental plants. That fragrance is like nothing else that you can have in your garden. You may want to spring plant it if you're in colder areas. And other than that, this is a variegated trailing gardenia. This is Alyssium floridanum gray ghost, and it has the perfect name because it has this gray bluish foliage on it with a little bit of white variegation out on the edge. Really neat looking coloration on this Alyssium. These have flowers, mainly kind of a little bit on the interior, these spidery looking flowers. It might smell a little bit fetid, that are very, very pale pink in the spring, and then it'll get a few repeat flowers during the fall months. This plant will end up somewhere you can keep it anywhere between like 6 and 10 feet in height, maybe 4 to 6 feet in width, or slightly a little bit wider than that in time. This is a fantastic plant for part shade or shade conditions where maybe you have some deer pressure and you need something that will give you a bit of a border or a screen in your garden. They're acid-loving plants native to the southeast. They'll take slightly moist conditions. They'll also take dry shade conditions, but what we know from every Alyssium variety that we have in our garden here in Raleigh, it takes a minute to get them rooted in. So initially, they'll wilt a lot, and it seems like they're just never going to get themselves established, and then eventually they get themselves rooted in, and then we barely even have to think about them. And we have many varieties of native and non-native Alyssium here in the Raleigh garden. Really an incredibly low maintenance plant that the deer aren't going to bother. Really not going to have to do a whole lot of pruning on it. It keeps a pretty full habit on its own. If you did any pruning on it, it'd be in the late winter. Again, these are acid-loving plants, and so our soils typically in the southeast are kind of perfect for these. With our slightly acidic soil, if you have more of a neutral pH, you can fertilize it in the spring. We fertilize everything in this garden with just a regular organic fertilizer, but if you needed to, you can use organic fertilizer that has a soil acidifier that may be helpful if you're have more of a neutral pH. Deer resistant, rabbit resistant, one of those plants that you can put in, a native plant that you can put into your part shade or shade conditions that will be able to compete in time with your root competition and that kind of thing, create an interesting border. Or corner foundation plant in a shady spot would be another use for it as well. But I don't think there's hardly anything that we could grow that's evergreen like this that would have this blue hue to it and this beautiful variegation. This is a gray ghost Alyssium. Juliet Claera from the Southern Living Plant Collection, one of our favorite go-to evergreen shrubs. This one leafs out with kind of a maroon foliage during the growing season, during spring and early summer, and then they develop into these variegated creamy white and dark green leaves that looks like every single leaf is individually painted. It's really a very, very striking plant. These will reach something like 8 to 10 feet in height, maybe 4 to 6 feet in width, something like that. You can control it at kind of whatever size you want. Great in a mixed border, mixed hedge, that kind of thing. If you put some darker green things with it, it makes this variegation stand out even more. These are hardy in zone 7 to 10. Moderate to slower growth than some of its green counterparts. These variegated plants are somewhat slower. Full sun is best, and that will keep it its fullest. We've got this one in part shade, and we have to do the occasional little bit of pruning on it because it's trying to stretch on us just a bit. But again, this is a great 4-season plant for anyone's garden. It likes well-drained conditions, so don't put it in a wet space. This is Juliet Clara. This is Miss Lemon Abelia from the Southern Living Plant Collection. This is a low doming, evergreen, variegated shrub that is fantastic for pollinators. It has a yellow and green variegation. The yellow will become kind of an off-white color in time as the leaves age on it. All the new growth is just really bright and showy during the growing season. They're hardy in zone 6 to 9. They're kind of semi-evergreen in zone 6, fully evergreen down in zone 9. These reach about 3 feet in height, about 4 feet in width. They're deer resistant, insect resistant, rabbit resistant, fantastic drought tolerant, low doming shrubs. Pollinators absolutely love these. They'll start flowering sometime around June and bloom literally all summer long. Just a great choice for a low doming evergreen plant. If you have a low foundation in a sunny space, perfect plant for you. This is Angiostar fatshedra from the Southern Living Plant Collection, a intergenous hybrid between Fatsia japonica, which is a shrub, and ivy, which is a climber spreading plant. It gets the best of both worlds from the two parent plants. It can climb on things, but you have to attach it. It doesn't attach itself up there, so it doesn't do damage to your structure. It has sterile seed. It has flowers in the fall that produce seed. The pollinators love the flowers, the birds love the seed, but they're sterile, so it's not going to spread itself all over the place like ivy. And then there's been a bunch of selections like Angiostar here that have these beautiful variegations, and this one is just one of the tops. It starts off with kind of a yellow and green variegation and settles into kind of an off-white and green variegation. And again, this is an evergreen. It's hardy in zone 7B to 9 or 7B to 10. In zone 7, I would probably spring plant it because it is a little winter sensitive. It needs to go in a shady space, which is where we've got it in a perfect, ideal conditions here. It's getting about 2 or 2.5 hours of direct sun. And I think it does need that a little bit of direct sun to keep this really vibrant color. I think it's a little more dull in shadier conditions. We're using it to climb on the corner of our screen porch here, but it can be used as a ground cover. It can be used in a container. It can be used as an indoor plant in colder areas where it can be outside and then brought inside. It can be limbed up into kind of a small tree form. All kinds of uses for this plant. And it's one of these 4-season plants. It's always doing something. It's super, super interesting. And we just love it. This is Angiostar fatshedra. This is Fatsia japonica spider's web from the Southern Living Plant Collection. This has beautiful changeable variegated leaves throughout the season. Some are speckled, some are striped, some are just kind of beautiful versions of variegated large palmate leaves. This is an evergreen. This is a shade plant. They're hardy in zone 8 to 10. Here we are in zone 7B in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we've got it tucked up against the house that needs to be in a protected space to grow it in zone 7 for sure. This thing flowers in the fall with these kind of almost alien looking spherical white flower clusters that the pollinators absolutely love. They eventually become black berries. Again, this is a shade evergreen that likes moist, well-drained conditions, very pest resistant. We keep it mulched, we keep the weeds away from it, we fertilize it in the late winter. We really don't ever need to prune this plant. It'll reach about 4 to 5 feet in height and about 3 to 4 feet in width. Easy plant, spider's web fatsia. This is a sarissa. This is a plant that we see quite frequently in some of our garden tours that we do. And again, another one that's probably super underused overall in ornamental landscaping. This plant can ultimately get 2, 3, 4 feet in height and 2, 3, 4 feet in width if we let it. These tend to be evergreen or kind of semi-evergreen. They get little white flowers on them, but this is the variegated version of it, and it doesn't need to do anything. It doesn't need to do anything other than what it's doing right now, which is it's a good pop of color. These tend to like kind of rich, slightly moist soils, not wet, but slightly kind of moist, evenly moist soils. That's the best place for them. And we have ours in part shade here. Late afternoon, it's getting some direct sun on it, but that's about it. It could probably tolerate a little more sun than that. Slow growing. So again, one of the reasons it's probably not as commercially available as it should be. We got this and the Pittosporum heterophyllum that will be in this video off the cart at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum in a very small container. And so, you know, this is 2 or 3 years on with this plant, but I like that. I like to watch plants grow. I don't need a plant to jump out to 5 feet, because if it jumps out to 5 feet really quickly, that means I now have to maintain it at 5 feet for the next 20 years of its existence in the garden. This one I'm just never going to have to do any maintenance to. Last plant in this variegated shrub and tree video, and again, there are, we could make this video 200, 300 plants probably if we spent time to find them all. I mean, there's just so many great things that we can add to our garden. And again, these variegations are different. This is more of a speckled variegation here. This is a hydrangea paniculata called Yuki Gesho, and you'll get almost white leaves. Look how that one's literally half the leaf is one thing and half the leaf is something else. And you can see that white side of the leaf is smaller than that speckled side that has a little bit more chlorophyll to work with. Interesting, you know, observation there what that white, you know, color can do. This one has, I guess, kind of pinkish stems. Those pink petioles that hold the leaf on there are pretty showy. This one does not bloom as much overall. There's another hydrangea paniculata literally right next to it in full bloom. So, you know, this is what hydrangea paniculata should be doing right now. The actual reason this one doesn't have any flowers on it though is because I took a bunch of cuttings off of it and took them to a nursery friend of mine that wanted to start growing this plant. Easy plant to grow. Should be pretty widely available. I don't see, you know, I realize it's not going to flower quite as well as some of the other hydrangea paniculatas, but it's looked like this since April. Everybody else has been waiting for their hydrangea paniculatas to bloom, you know, for the last 10 months, you know, 9 months. This thing, as soon as it flushed out April 15th, this is how it looked. And it'll look like this until it goes to sleep in the fall. So with or without flowers on it, I think this plant should be more widely used. As vigorous grower, it could get 8 or 10, just like, you know, hydrangea paniculatas are sometimes referred to as tree hydrangeas, so it can get big in time, but it's really easy to control. In the winter time, because I'm just growing this as mainly a foliage plant, you know, I can prune it any time, and having that flush back out, that new foliage is going to be the freshest and best variegation and brightest coloration. But love this plant. And so let us know down in the comment section below this video, what's your shrubs or tree wise, you know, what's your favorite go-to variegated plant for your garden? Thanks for watching.